Time seemed to freeze in the spacious hallway of the mansion. The afternoon sunlight streamed through tall windows, casting golden rectangles across the polished hardwood floor. Madison stood motionless, her small finger pointing at the ornate gold frame on the wall. Inside the frame, a younger version of her mother smiled brightly, her arm linked with a tall man Madison had just met moments ago. "Why is my mom's picture in your house?" Madison asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Michael Harris stood frozen, his face draining of color as he stared first at the girl, then at the photograph he passed every day. The photograph of the woman he had loved, the woman who had died 10 years ago in a car accident. Or so he had been told. Sometimes destiny doesn't knock on your door. Sometimes you knock on destiny's door instead. 3 hours earlier, Madison had been in a very different world. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains of the small apartment in Boston's South End. Madison sat at the kitchen table, carefully wrapping homemade candies in colorful wax paper. Each piece was folded with precision, the ends twisted just so. Her mother had taught her to be meticulous with her hands, and at 10 years old, Madison had already mastered the art. On the counter nearby lay a pile of medical bills, their red past due stamps visible, even from where Madison sat. Next to them, an orange prescription bottle stood nearly empty. The label read Rebecca Clark and listed medications Madison couldn't pronounce, but knew were essential for her mother's autoimmune condition. Madison glanced toward the bedroom where her mother slept fitfully. Rebecca had been up most of the night with fever and pain, a flare-up worse than usual. The doctor had prescribed a new medication, but the insurance had only covered part of it. They needed $300 more, and rent was due next week. Madison carefully placed the last candy in her basket and covered it with a checkered cloth. She stood and walked quietly to her mother's bedroom door, peering inside. Rebecca lay sleeping, her face pale except for the feverish spots on her cheeks. Even in illness, she was beautiful with delicate features and auburn hair spread across the pillow. "I'll take care of everything, Mom," Madison whispered, though too softly for her mother to hear. She wrote a quick note on the refrigerator whiteboard. "Gone to sell candies. Back soon. Don't worry." She added a little heart and a smiley face, just as she always did. Positivity was important, her mother always said, especially when things were difficult. Their apartment was small but neat, with second-hand furniture arranged thoughtfully to maximize the limited space. Photos of Madison and Rebecca lined the walls, chronicling their life together. What was noticeably missing were pictures of extended family or Madison's father. Whenever Madison asked about him, Rebecca would simply say he had died before Madison was born. End of story. The one mysterious item that connected Madison to this unknown father was the heart-shaped pendant with a blue stone that her mother had given her on her 8th birthday. "This was a gift from someone who loved me very much," Rebecca had said. "Now it's yours to keep." Madison wore it every day since. Madison slipped out of the apartment, locking the door behind her with the key she kept on a cord around her neck. Their building was old and needed repairs, with peeling paint and a perpetually broken elevator. Madison took the 4 flights of stairs down to the street, her candy basket secure in her arms. The contrast between her neighborhood and the affluent Beacon Hill area where she planned to sell her candies could not have been more stark. While her street featured discount stores and check-cashing businesses, Beacon Hill boasted historic brownstones, boutique shops, and tree-lined streets where luxury cars lined the curbs. Madison had learned early that wealthy people sometimes paid more for homemade treats, especially when sold by a polite child with a sad story. She didn't enjoy using her mother's illness to sell candy, but necessity had taught her that sometimes sympathy opened wallets wider than the quality of her products alone. As Madison walked the 30 minutes to Beacon Hill, she rehearsed her pitch. She wouldn't lie, but she would emphasize that the money was for her sick mother's medicine. That part was true. The candy was good too, made with her grandmother's recipe before she passed away 2 years ago. Another truth and another loss in Madison's young life. While Madison made her way across Boston, Michael Harris stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows of his penthouse office, overlooking the city he had helped reshape through his software company, Harris Technologies. At 35, Michael had achieved what most would consider extraordinary success. His company started in his college dorm room, now employed over 500 people, and was on the verge of being acquired for nearly $200 million. Yet something was missing. The view from his private office revealed a city full of life and connection, things Michael had sacrificed in his climb to success. His reflection in the glass showed a handsome man with premature touches of silver at his temples, wearing a perfectly tailored charcoal suit. His eyes, however, told a different story. They carried a heaviness, a loneliness, that his wealth couldn't erase. "The board is ready for you, Mr. Harris," his assistant announced from the doorway. Michael nodded, adjusting his vintage Hamilton watch, a relic from the 1980s that had belonged to his father. It was one of the few personal items he kept in his otherwise minimalist space. That and the photograph on his credenza of a young woman with auburn hair and a smile that had once made his world complete. "I'll be right there," he replied, turning away from the window and the emptiness of the sprawling city below. The boardroom was filled with men and women in expensive suits, their faces masks of practiced neutrality as Michael entered. His sister Stephanie, 32, and the company's chief operations officer gave him a subtle nod. She was the only true ally in the room, the only person who understood what this company really meant to him. "We've reviewed the Axiom Tech offer," Richard Morgan, the eldest board member, began. His voice carried the weight of authority that came from decades in business. At 65, with silver hair and steel-rimmed glasses, he commanded respect. $200 million is an excellent valuation, particularly given the current market conditions. Michael remained standing at the head of the table. "And what happens to our employees? Our ongoing projects?" "The usual assurances," Richard replied with a dismissive wave. "Retention packages for key personnel, continuation of flagship projects. Nothing out of the ordinary." "Nothing out of the ordinary," Michael repeated flatly. "Just selling the company I've built for 13 years. Stephanie intervened. "What my brother means is that we want to ensure our company's mission continues. We didn't build Harris Technologies just to cash out at the first good offer." The tension in the room was palpable. This meeting was merely the opening salvo in what promised to be weeks of negotiations and posturing. The board wanted the deal. Michael wasn't sure what he wanted anymore. "We should take time to review all aspects of the offer," Michael finally said. "I'd like detailed reports on how this acquisition would affect each department, especially our development team working on the adaptive learning software for children with disabilities." Several board members exchanged glances. This was Michael's passion project, one that promised minimal profit but maximum impact. It was also the project most likely to be shelved by any acquiring company looking to streamline operations. "Of course," Richard conceded, though his tone suggested he found such concerns unnecessary. "We'll have those reports prepared, but I would caution against letting sentimentality drive business decisions." Michael's jaw tightened. Sentimentality, as if caring about the people who helped build your company was a weakness. "The meeting is adjourned for now," Michael said firmly. "We'll reconvene next week after I've reviewed the reports." As the board members filed out, Stephanie lingered behind. "You know they're going to push for this deal, Michael. Mother's shares passing to the board after her death gave them more leverage than we anticipated." Michael ran a hand through his dark hair. "I know. I just need time to think." "Time won't change the numbers," Stephanie said gently. "Maybe this is for the best. You've been working nonstop since—" She hesitated. "Since Rebecca died," Michael finished for her. "You can say it, it's been 10 years. Stephanie nodded, her expression softening. "Maybe after the acquisition you could finally take some time for yourself. Travel. Meet someone new." Michael's eyes drifted to his watch. "I'm not interested in meeting someone new." "Michael, you can't keep living like this. Rebecca wouldn't have wanted—" "We don't know what she would have wanted," Michael cut her off sharply. "She's gone. End of discussion." Stephanie sighed but didn't press further. She knew when her brother had reached his limits. "I'll start reviewing the offer details. Try to get some rest this weekend, okay?" After she left, Michael returned to his office and sank into his chair. The photograph on his credenza caught his eye. Rebecca looked so alive in it, her eyes bright with promise and love. They had been engaged to be married when the accident happened. One rainy night, a car crash, a closed casket funeral arranged by his mother. And just like that, his future, their future, was gone. Michael turned the photo face down. Perhaps Stephanie was right. Perhaps it was time to finally move on. The acquisition could be the fresh start he needed. Once the company was sold, he could leave Boston behind, leave the memories behind, start over somewhere else. The irony wasn't lost on him. He had built a successful company worth hundreds of millions, yet he felt like a failure in the things that truly mattered. Michael's phone buzzed with a message from Robert, his longtime house manager. "Plumber finished repairing the guest bathroom. Will need to approve the work." A mundane detail in a life full of mundane details masked as important business. Michael texted back a quick acknowledgement. At least it gave him an excuse to leave the office early on a Friday. He could stop by the mansion, approve the repairs, and perhaps pour himself a drink to start the empty weekend stretching before him. As Michael drove his Aston Martin through the streets of Boston toward his Beacon Hill home, Madison was making her way through the same neighborhood, her candy basket balanced carefully in her arms. She had already sold half her inventory, earning nearly $70. Not enough for the medicine, but a good start. She approached the largest home on the street, an imposing brick mansion with wrought iron gates and a meticulously maintained front garden. Madison hesitated, intimidated by the grandeur, but remembered her mother's needs. She took a deep breath and pressed the intercom button at the gate. After a moment, a cultured voice responded, "Harris Residence. How may I help you?" "Hello," Madison said, her rehearsed speech momentarily forgotten. "I'm selling homemade candies to help buy medicine for my mom. Would you like to buy some?" There was a pause, then the voice replied, "One moment, please." Madison waited, shifting from one foot to the other. Just as she was about to give up, the gate buzzed and slowly swung open. An older gentleman in a crisp black suit appeared at the front door of the mansion and walked down the path toward her. "Good afternoon, young lady," he said kindly. "I'm Robert, the house manager. What kind of candies are you selling?" Madison lifted the checkered cloth to reveal her carefully wrapped treats. "Caramels and chocolate fudge. My grandma's recipe. They're $5 each, but you can have two for $8. Robert's eyes crinkled with amusement. "A businesswoman, I see." He studied her for a moment. "You said these are for your mother's medicine." Madison nodded seriously. "She has an autoimmune disease. The new medicine costs $300 and our insurance won't cover all of it." Something in Robert's expression softened further. "Wait here, I'll get my wallet." As Robert turned back toward the house, Madison's curiosity got the better of her. The massive front door stood slightly ajar, offering a glimpse into a world so different from her own. Without really deciding to, Madison followed Robert, stepping quietly onto the stone path leading to the house. She told herself she would just peek inside just for a moment. Her mother would be horrified at such an invasion of privacy, but the allure of seeing how the other half lived was too strong to resist. The entryway of the mansion was enormous, with a sweeping staircase and marble floors that gleamed in the afternoon light. Artwork adorned the walls, and fresh flowers filled a massive vase on a center table. Madison stepped inside, her eyes wide as she took in the splendor. Robert had disappeared down a hallway, giving Madison the chance to venture further into the house unnoticed. She wandered into what appeared to be a formal living room, marveling at the plush furniture and crystal chandeliers. It was like a museum or a palace from one of her storybooks. She continued down a corridor lined with photographs. Most were formal portraits of people she assumed were family members, given their similar features. Serious-looking men and elegant women gazed out from ornate frames, their expressions reserved. Then Madison stopped abruptly, her breath catching in her throat. Among these strangers was a face she knew intimately, a face she had seen every day of her life. Her mother. The photograph showed Rebecca younger and more carefree than Madison had ever seen her, standing beside a handsome dark-haired man. They were on a beach, laughing, their arms around each other. Rebecca wore a white sundress, her auburn hair, longer than she kept it now, flowing in the ocean breeze. The man looked at her with undisguised adoration. Madison stepped closer, confusion washing over her. Why would her mother's picture be in this mansion? Who was this man with his arm around her? "What are you doing in here?" a deep voice demanded from behind her. Madison spun around, nearly dropping her candy basket. The man from the photograph stood in the doorway, his expression a mixture of surprise and irritation. He was older now, with touches of silver in his dark hair, but unmistakably the same person. I'm selling candy," Madison stammered, holding up her basket as if for proof. Michael Harris frowned, stepping into the room. "Robert mentioned a girl at the gate. You shouldn't have come inside without permission." "I'm sorry," Madison said quickly. "I was just curious." Her eyes darted back to the photograph. "But that's my mom in that picture." Michael followed her gaze, his expression freezing. "What did you say?" Madison pointed at the photograph. "That's my mom, Rebecca Clark." Michael stared at her, then at the photograph, his face draining of color. "That's impossible," he said hoarsely. "Rebecca died 10 years ago." Madison shook her head emphatically. "No, she didn't. She's my mom. She's at home right now. She's sick, but she's definitely alive." Michael approached the photograph slowly, as if in a trance. "Rebecca Clark," he repeated. "You're saying Rebecca Clark is your mother?" "Yes," Madison confirmed. And I'm Madison Clark. Michael turned to fully face the girl, seeing her clearly for the first time. She had auburn hair several shades darker than Rebecca's, but her eyes were unmistakably his own. The same deep blue that looked back at him from the mirror every morning. The same shape, the same long lashes. "How old are you?" he asked, his voice barely audible. 10 by each. Madison answered, growing increasingly uncomfortable under his intense scrutiny. Almost 11 in 2 months. Michael did the math quickly. If Rebecca had been pregnant when she supposedly died, the timing aligned perfectly. "Where do you and your mother live?" Michael asked, working to keep his voice steady. "In the South End," Madison replied, then hesitated. "I don't think I should tell you exactly where. My mom says I shouldn't give our address to strangers." "Your mother is right," Michael said automatically, though his mind was racing. Rebecca alive, Rebecca with a daughter, his daughter. It had to be, the timing, the eyes. "What else has your mother told you about your father?" Madison shifted uncomfortably. "Just that he died before I was born." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. Died before she was born. The exact mirror of what he had been told about Rebecca. "I should go," Madison said, taking a step backward. "My mom will be worried." Michael realized he was frightening the girl and made an effort to soften his expression. "Wait, please. I'd like to buy some of your candy." He reached for his wallet with shaking hands. "How much do you need for your mother's medicine?" $300, Madison answered, watching him warily. Without hesitation, Michael pulled out several $100 bills and extended them to her. "Take this, for the medicine." Madison stared at the money, her eyes widening. "That's too much. My candies aren't worth that much." "Consider it a donation," Michael said gently, "for a good cause." Madison hesitantly took the money, her practical nature overcoming her suspicion. This would cover the medicine with enough left over to help with rent. "Thank you," she said sincerely. Michael noticed a pendant hanging from a chain around Madison's neck, a heart-shaped silver piece with a distinctive blue stone. His breath caught again. He had given that exact pendant to Rebecca on the night he proposed. "That necklace," he said, pointing to it. "Where did you get it?" Madison's hand went protectively to the pendant. "My mom gave it to me. She said it was from someone who loved her very much." She tucked it back under her shirt. "I really should go now." Michael knew he couldn't keep her there, nor could he follow her without frightening her further. But he couldn't let her disappear either, possibly forever. He needed to know the truth. "Madison," he said, trying to keep his voice calm. "My name is Michael Harris. I knew your mother a long time ago." He took one of his business cards from his pocket and handed it to her. "If she needs anything else, or if you do, please call me. Anytime." Madison accepted the card cautiously, glancing once more at the photograph before slipping the card into her pocket. "Thank you for the money, Mr. Harris," she said formally, backing toward the door. As Madison hurried out of the mansion, Robert appeared in the hallway looking perplexed. "Sir, did you speak with the young lady?" Michael stood motionless, staring at the empty doorway through which Madison had disappeared. "Robert," he said quietly, "I need you to do something for me. I need you to find out everything you can about Rebecca Clark and her daughter Madison. They live somewhere in the South End." Robert's eyebrows rose in surprise, but he nodded. "Of course, Mr. Harris. May I ask why?" Michael turned to the photograph on the wall, reaching out to touch the glass over Rebecca's smiling face. "Because I think I just met my daughter." Madison clutched the money tightly as she hurried home, her mind whirling with questions. Who was Michael Harris, and why did he have a picture of her mother in his mansion? Why had her mother told her that her father was dead if he clearly wasn't? And why had Mr. Harris looked at her as if he'd seen a ghost? The sun was beginning to set as Madison arrived back at their apartment building. She climbed the 4 flights of stairs, her candy basket much lighter now, but her pockets considerably heavier. She unlocked the apartment door and stepped inside. "Mom," she called out. Rebecca emerged from her bedroom looking pale but more rested than she had that morning. "There you are. I was getting worried." Her eyes narrowed as she noticed Madison's expression. "What's wrong? Did something happen?" Madison set down her basket and pulled out the money. "I sold almost all the candy, and I got enough for your medicine, more than enough." Rebecca stared at the handful of $100 bills. "Madison, where did you get this much money? This is way more than you could have made selling candy." Madison hesitated, unsure how to explain her encounter. A man bought a lot of candy. He was really generous. Rebecca took the money, counting it with growing alarm. "This is over $500. No one pays this much for homemade candy. What really happened?" Madison took a deep breath and reached into her pocket for the business card. I met someone today. He had a picture of you in his house. Rebecca froze, her face draining of what little color it had. What do you mean? What picture? Who was this man? Madison handed over the business card. His name is Michael Harris. He lives in a mansion in Beacon Hill, and he has a picture of you on the beach with him. You looked really happy in it. Rebecca took the card, her hands trembling so badly she nearly dropped it. Her eyes filled with a mixture of terror and disbelief as she read the name. You went to Beacon Hill, Madison. I've told you never to go to that part of town. But that's where the rich people live, Madison protested. They pay more for candy. I was just trying to help with your medicine. She paused, watching her mother's reaction carefully. Mom, why is your picture in his house? Who is he? Rebecca sank onto the couch, the business card clutched in her white-knuckled hand. Did you tell him where we live? She asked urgently. No, just that we live in the South End. I remembered not to give our address. Madison sat beside her mother. Mom, you're scaring me. What's going on? Why are you so upset? Rebecca closed her eyes briefly as if gathering strength. Madison, I need you to promise me something. Promise you'll never go back there. Never try to contact that man again. But why he seemed to know you. He looked at me funny, like he was surprised to see me. And he gave us all this money for your medicine. Madison touched her pendant. He asked about my necklace too. He recognized it. Rebecca's eyes snapped open and she grasped Madison's shoulders. What exactly did you tell him? Did you tell him your full name, your age? Madison nodded, increasingly confused and frightened by her mother's reaction. Yes, I told him I'm Madison Clark and that I'm 10. And I told him you're my mom and that you're alive. She hesitated before adding, he said he thought you died 10 years ago. Rebecca let out a small choke sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. Of course he did, she whispered. That's what they wanted him to believe. What who wanted him to believe, Mom? You're not making any sense. Madison's voice rose with frustration. Is Michael Harris my father? Is that why you're acting so strange? The question hung in the air between them. Rebecca looked away, unable to meet her daughter's searching gaze. It's complicated, Madison. There are things you don't understand, things I've kept from you to protect you. I'm not a baby anymore, Madison insisted. I deserve to know the truth. Is he my father? Rebecca's silence was answer enough. Madison stood up abruptly, anger and hurt washing over her in equal measure. You lied to me. All these years you said my father was dead. But he's not. He's living in a mansion in Beacon Hill. Madison, please, Rebecca pleaded, reaching for her daughter's hand. I had my reasons. Good reasons. What reasons could be good enough to lie about something this important? Madison demanded, tears forming in her eyes. Every Father's Day, every time kids at school talked about their dads, you let me think mine was dead. Rebecca pulled Madison back down to sit beside her, keeping hold of her hand, despite Madison's attempt to pull away. Listen to me. The situation with Michael, with your father, it was dangerous. I had no choice but to disappear, to let him think I was dead. Dangerous how? Madison asked skeptically. He didn't seem dangerous, just surprised. Rebecca toyed with the business card, turning it over and over in her fingers. Not him, his mother. Evelyn Harris was a powerful woman who didn't think I was good enough for her son. She made it clear that if I didn't disappear from his life, there would be consequences. What kind of consequences? Rebecca's eyes darkened with old fear. The kind that could get people hurt. The kind that meant I had to choose between staying with Michael and keeping you safe. Madison was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. But his mom isn't there now, just him and an old man named Robert. Rebecca looked up sharply. You went inside his house? Madison nodded guiltily. I was curious. The door was open a little bit. Rebecca closed her eyes again, breathing deeply to calm herself. Madison, this is exactly why I didn't want you in that part of town. Michael Harris is part of one of the wealthiest families in Boston. People like that, they have power. They can make problems disappear. Or make people disappear. Madison touched her pendant, again drawing comfort from its familiar shape. If his mom was so terrible, why do you still wear the necklace he gave you? Why did you give it to me? Rebecca's expression softened slightly. Because despite everything that happened, the love Michael and I shared was real. That necklace reminded me of better times. And I wanted you to have something that connected you to your father, even if you couldn't know him. But now I do know him, Madison pointed out. I met him today. And he knows about me. Yes, Rebecca said quietly, her voice filled with resignation. And now everything will change. Madison's confusion was evident. Change how? Rebecca didn't answer directly. Instead, she asked, did he say anything else? Did he ask you to come back? He gave me his card and said to call if we needed anything, Madison replied. He seemed sad and shocked, like he'd seen a ghost. Rebecca laughed bitterly. In his mind, he has. He's seen two ghosts today, me and the daughter he never knew existed. The reality of the situation was finally sinking in for Madison. So he really didn't know about me all this time. No, Rebecca confirmed. He didn't know. I found out I was pregnant after I'd already disappeared, after his mother had already arranged my death. Madison tried to process this information. Her father was alive. He lived in a mansion. He hadn't abandoned them. He simply hadn't known they existed. And now he did. What happens now? Madison asked. Rebecca looked down at the business card in her hand, then at the money on the coffee table. Money that could solve their immediate problems, but open the door to so many more. I don't know, she admitted, but I'm afraid we're about to find out. Outside their apartment, the street lights flickered on as darkness fell. And across the city in his Beacon Hill mansion, Michael Harris sat in his study staring at the old photograph of himself and Rebecca, his world irrevocably changed by a 10-year-old girl selling candy. A girl with his eyes who had called his long-lost love Mom. A girl who, if his suspicions were correct, was his daughter. The daughter he never knew he had. Morning light filtered through the blinds of Michael's bedroom, casting thin golden stripes across his untouched bed. He hadn't slept. How could he when everything he believed for the past decade had crumbled in an instant? He sat in the leather armchair by the window, still wearing yesterday's clothes, his tie loosened and hanging askew. On the side table lay an empty whiskey glass and the business card he had given Madison, its twin removed from his wallet and placed beside it like a talisman. The familiarity of his own name and contact information provided the only solid ground in a world suddenly turned liquid beneath his feet. Robert knocked softly before entering with a tray of coffee. The house manager's concerned gaze took in Michael's disheveled appearance, the untouched bed and the empty glass. Sir, I've made some inquiries as requested, Robert said, setting down the tray. Rebecca Clark and her daughter Madison live in an apartment building on Harrison Avenue in the South End. Ms. Clark works as a freelance graphic designer, primarily for small businesses. She was hospitalized twice last year for complications related to lupus. Michael looked up, his red-rimmed eyes focusing with effort. Lupus? She's sick. Yes, sir. It's an autoimmune disease. The medical bills appear to be substantial. Robert hesitated. There's something else. I found a record of a death certificate for Rebecca Clark dated October 15th, 10 years ago. It was filed in Massachusetts. Cause of death listed as vehicular accident. Michael's jaw clenched. The same date as the accident I was told about. Yes, sir. And there's one more detail of note. Robert's voice softened. The death certificate was certified by Dr. James Whitmore, my mother's personal physician. Michael whispered, the pieces clicking into place with sickening clarity. Indeed, sir. Michael stood abruptly. I need to see her. I need to see both of them. Sir, if I may suggest, Robert said carefully, approaching them directly might be intimidating. The young lady seemed quite startled by yesterday's encounter. Perhaps a more measured approach would be advisable. Michael ran a hand through his disheveled hair. What do you suggest? Perhaps we could learn more before making direct contact. Observe from a distance. Ensure that any approach is made under the most favorable circumstances. Under normal circumstances, Michael would have rejected such cautious tactics, but these were not normal circumstances. The woman he had mourned for 10 years was alive. He potentially had a daughter. One wrong move could send them both running, possibly disappearing again. All right, Michael conceded, but I want to drive by the apartment today. I need to see where they live at least. Robert nodded. Of course, sir. I'll have the car ready in 30 minutes. Across the city, Madison sat at her bedroom window watching the street below. Saturday mornings usually found her helping her mother with chores or working on school projects. Today she couldn't focus on anything except the revelations of the previous day. Her father was alive. Her father was rich. Her father had believed her mother was dead. The door opened softly and Rebecca entered carrying 2 mugs of hot chocolate. She handed one to Madison and sat on the edge of the bed. You've been quiet this morning, Rebecca observed. Madison took the mug, but didn't drink. I'm thinking. About Michael. Madison nodded. About everything. Why we live here instead of in a big house. Why I never knew my dad. Why you lied. Rebecca winced at the last word. I didn't want to lie to you, Madison. I was trying to protect you. From what? Madison challenged. He didn't seem scary, just sad. Rebecca sighed, cradling her own mug. It's complicated. Michael himself wasn't the threat. It was his family, his mother especially. Evelyn Harris was formidable. Was Madison caught the past tense? I saw in the newspaper 2 years ago that she passed away. Heart attack. Rebecca's expression was unreadable. But by then, so much time had passed. You were settled in school. We had our life here, and I was afraid. Afraid of what? Rebecca looked down at her mug. Afraid he had moved on, found someone else, built a new life without us. Afraid of disrupting your world by introducing a stranger as your father. She hesitated, afraid he wouldn't believe me, or worse, wouldn't want us. Madison absorbed this, her young mind wrestling with adult complexities. So what do we do now? He knows we exist. He knows where we live, or he could find out easily. Yes, Rebecca admitted. I've been thinking about that all night. I think we need to prepare for him to contact us. Or, she took a deep breath. Maybe we should contact him first on our terms. Madison's eyes widened. Really, you want to see him? Want isn't exactly the word, but I think it's inevitable now. And I'd rather face this head on than wait in fear for a knock on the door. Madison set down her mug. I could call him. I have his card. Rebecca shook her head. No, honey, this is for me to handle, adult to adult. She reached out to tuck a strand of hair behind Madison's ear. But first, I need you to tell me exactly what happened yesterday. Every detail of your conversation with Michael. As Madison recounted the encounter, Rebecca listened intently, her face cycling through emotions, fear, sadness, and something harder to name, something that might have been longing. Meanwhile, Michael sat in the backseat of his Bentley as Robert drove slowly past a weathered apartment building on Harrison Avenue. The neighborhood was working class, with small businesses occupying the ground floors of most buildings and apartments above. Nothing like the Beacon Hill mansion where Michael resided. That's the building, sir, Robert said, pointing to a 5-story brick structure with fire escapes zigzagging down the facade. 4th floor apartment 4C. Michael stared up at the windows, wondering which ones belonged to Rebecca and Madison. The building wasn't dilapidated, but it was clearly aging, with peeling paint around the window frames and a front door that had seen better days. Drive around the block once more, Michael instructed. As they circled back, Michael spotted a small figure exiting the building. His heart lurched. Madison, wearing jeans and a red sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. She was carrying a small bag and walking purposefully. Stop the car, Michael ordered. That's her. Robert pulled to the curb about half a block away. They watched as Madison walked to a corner store and disappeared inside. Sir, what would you like to do? Robert asked after a moment. Michael hesitated. Following a 10-year-old girl could appear predatory no matter his intentions. Yet he couldn't tear his eyes away. Let's wait, see if she returns to the apartment. A few minutes later, Madison emerged from the store with what appeared to be a small bag of groceries. As she turned toward her building, she suddenly stopped, her attention caught by something across the street. Michael followed her gaze. A man in his 60s stood partially concealed beside a parked van, watching Madison intently. He wore a weathered leather jacket and had the alert posture of someone used to surveillance. When he realized Madison had spotted him, he quickly turned and walked away. Robert, do you see that man, the one in the leather jacket, walking away now? Yes, sir. He appears to have been watching the young lady. Michael frowned. Follow him, discreetly. Robert eased the Bentley forward as the man rounded a corner. They followed at a distance, watching as he got into an older model sedan and drove away. Should I follow the vehicle, sir? Michael was torn between pursuing the mystery man and returning to keep an eye on Madison. Get the license plate number, then let him go. I want to know who that was. Robert jotted down the number. I'll make inquiries immediately. Now take me back to the apartment building, Michael directed. I need to make sure Madison is safe. When they returned, Madison was nowhere to be seen, presumably having gone back inside. Michael sat in the car staring up at the building, struggling with what to do next. His instinct was to charge upstairs, confront Rebecca, demand answers. But Robert's earlier counsel for caution echoed in his mind. Sir, Robert said gently, perhaps it's time to return home and formulate a plan. We've confirmed their location. We've seen the young lady as well. Further surveillance might be noticed and cause alarm. Michael reluctantly agreed. You're right. Take me home. But I want you to find out everything you can about that man who was watching Madison. and I want to know more about my mother's involvement in all this." "Of course, sir." As they drove back to Beacon Hill, Michael pulled out his phone and dialed a number he rarely used. "Stephanie, it's Michael. I need to talk to you. It's important. Can you come over to the house this afternoon?" He paused, listening. "No, it can't wait until Monday. This is personal. It's about Mother." After ending the call, Michael stared out the window at the passing city, his mind racing. If his mother had orchestrated Rebecca's fake death, who else had been involved? The family physician? Certainly. Probably the family lawyer. What about Stephanie? Had his sister known the truth all these years? And most disturbingly, who was the man watching Madison? Was he connected to his mother, somehow still carrying out surveillance years after her death? Back at the apartment, Madison burst through the door, breathless from running up 4 flights of stairs. Mom, he's here." Rebecca emerged from the kitchen, alarm on her face. "Who's here?" "Michael, I saw his car. A big, black, fancy one. It was parked down the street, and he was in the back seat watching our building." Rebecca paled. "Are you sure it was him?" Madison nodded emphatically. "Yes, but that's not all. There was another man, too, across the street. An older man in a leather jacket. He was watching me, too, but when he saw me notice him, he walked away quickly." Rebecca's hands began to shake so badly she had to set down the dish towel she was holding. "What did this man look like?" "Exactly." Madison described him: tall gray hair, weathered face, leather jacket. He looked kind of tough, but old. Rebecca sank onto the couch. "Frank," she whispered. "You know him. Frank Donovan. He worked for Evelyn Harris. He's the one who delivered the ultimatum to me 10 years ago. The one who made it clear what would happen if I didn't disappear." Rebecca's voice was hollow. "He's been watching us all these years. I've spotted him a few times, but he's usually more careful." Madison sat beside her mother. "So both Michael and this Frank person were watching our building today. Why?" "I don't know why Frank is still watching us. Evelyn is dead." Rebecca's brow furrowed. "Unless she left instructions, set something up to continue after her death." She shook her head. "As for Michael, he's obviously trying to find us to confirm what you told him." "Are we in danger?" Madison asked, her voice small. Rebecca pulled her daughter close. "No, sweetheart, I don't think so. Michael would never hurt us. And Frank, if he wanted to harm us, he's had 10 years to do it. So what do we do now?" Rebecca was silent for a long moment, then reached for her phone. "We stop hiding," she said firmly, pulling Michael's business card from her pocket. "It's time to face the past." At his Beacon Hill mansion, Michael paced the study while Stephanie sat watching him with growing concern. He had told her everything: Madison's unexpected visit, the discovery that Rebecca was alive, the fake death certificate, the surveillance of their apartment that morning. "This is insane, Michael," Stephanie said when he finally finished. "You're saying Mother faked Rebecca's death, created a fraudulent death certificate, maintained surveillance on her for a decade. Do you have any idea how extreme that sounds?" Michael stopped pacing to face his sister. "Extreme, yes, but impossible. You knew Mother as well as I did. Tell me she wasn't capable of this." Stephanie couldn't hold his gaze. "She was protective of you, of the family legacy." "Protective." Michael's laugh was bitter. "She controlled every aspect of my life. She never approved of Rebecca, said she wasn't from our world, whatever that meant. She wanted you to marry someone from a suitable family, someone who understood our position in society," Stephanie said, though her tone suggested she was repeating their mother's views rather than expressing her own. "And when I chose Rebecca instead, she took matters into her own hands." Michael resumed pacing. "The question is, who else knew? Did you know Stephanie?" His sister's head snapped up. "Of course not. How can you ask me that? I mourned Rebecca too. I saw what her death did to you." Michael studied her face, looking for signs of deception. Finding none, he nodded. "I'm sorry, I had to ask." "What are you going to do now?" Stephanie asked. "I don't know. Part of me wants to rush over there, demand explanations. Another part is terrified of pushing them away. Madison seemed scared of me yesterday, and Rebecca has obviously gone to great lengths to stay hidden. Maybe there's more to the story than we know," Stephanie suggested. "Maybe Mother's threats were just part of it." Before Michael could respond, his phone rang. He glanced at the screen, not recognizing the number. "Hello." "Michael, it is Rebecca." His heart stopped. After 10 years, her voice was exactly as he remembered it, perhaps a touch more mature, but unmistakably hers. He gripped the phone tighter, afraid it might somehow slip away, taking her with it. "Rebecca," he breathed. Stephanie's eyes widened. I think we need to talk, Rebecca said, her voice steady despite the enormity of the moment. Madison told me she met you yesterday, and I saw your car outside our building this morning. Yes, I needed to see where you lived, to make sure Madison was telling the truth, that you were really alive. He paused. Rebecca, what happened? They told me you died in a car accident. There was a funeral. I know, it's a long story and not one for the phone. She took an audible breath. Can we meet somewhere neutral ground? Yes, of course, anywhere. There's a coffee shop called Groundwork on Tremont Street. Can you meet us there tomorrow at 10? Michael's heart leapt at the word us. You'll bring Madison. A pause. Yes, she deserves to be part of this conversation. Thank you, Michael said, emotion thick in his voice. I'll be there. After they disconnected, Michael turned to Stephanie, a mixture of elation and terror on his face. She called me. We're meeting tomorrow. Stephanie rose to embrace her brother. That's good. Right a step forward. Yes, but... Michael pulled away, running a hand through his hair. What do I say to them? How do I even begin to make sense of the last 10 years? Just listen, Stephanie advised. Let Rebecca explain. Let Madison get to know you at her own pace. She hesitated. And Michael, remember that they have had their own lives all this time. Rebecca may not be the same person you knew. Madison has grown up without you. Don't expect to pick up where you left off or to instantly become a family. Michael nodded, the rational part of him acknowledging the wisdom in her words, even as his heart raced with hopes he dared not name. That night, neither Michael nor Rebecca slept much. In his mansion, Michael stood at the window watching the city lights and imagining Rebecca doing the same across town. Was she as terrified as he was, as hopeful, as angry? In their apartment, Rebecca sat at the kitchen table long after Madison had gone to bed. She pulled out an old metal box from the back of her closet, something she rarely allowed herself to examine. Inside were photographs, letters, mementos of her life with Michael before everything fell apart. Their first vacation together to Cape Cod, tickets from concerts they had attended, the program from his business school graduation where she had cheered from the audience, a napkin from the restaurant where he had proposed with, "She said yes," scrawled in his handwriting. And beneath it all, a newspaper clipping announcing the engagement of Michael Harris, son of prominent Bostonians Richard and Evelyn Harris, to Rebecca Clark. The photo showed them beaming, Michael in a suit, Rebecca in a simple dress, her hand positioned to display the engagement ring. She had sold the ring years ago when Madison was a baby and they needed money for rent. The memory still stung. Rebecca traced Michael's face in the yellowed photo. He had aged well, she thought, remembering his appearance from Madison's description. The silver at his temples would suit him, adding gravity to features that had once seemed almost too youthfully handsome. She wondered what he would think of her now. The years had been less kind to her. Stress and illness had left their marks. She was thinner than she should be, with new lines around her eyes and mouth. The vibrant girl in the engagement photo was long gone. What would happen tomorrow? Would he be angry? Would he want to be part of Madison's life? Would he believe her reasons for disappearing or see only betrayal? Rebecca carefully returned the mementos to the box and closed the lid. Tomorrow would bring answers, for better or worse. Morning arrived with weak October sunshine filtering through cloud cover. Rebecca dressed with care, choosing a simple blue dress that brought out her eyes, applying light makeup to add color to her pale cheeks. Madison, unusually quiet, put on her best jeans and a sweater her mother had bought her for her last birthday. They took the bus to Tremont Street, arriving 15 minutes early. The coffee shop was moderately busy with weekend patrons. Rebecca chose a table in the corner, positioned so they could see the door. "Are you nervous?" Madison asked as they waited, watching her mother fidget with her napkin. Rebecca gave a small smile, terrified. "Me too," Madison admitted. "What if he doesn't like me?" Rebecca reached across the table to squeeze her daughter's hand. "Impossible, you're amazing. He'll see that instantly." Madison didn't look convinced. "What if he's mad at you for not telling him about me?" "He might be," Rebecca acknowledged honestly, "but that's between him and me. None of this is your fault, Madison. Remember that." The bell above the door chimed, and both turned to look. Michael entered, scanning the room until his eyes found them. He was impeccably dressed in casual weekend attire, expensive, but not ostentatious. Their gazes locked, and for a moment it seemed the entire coffee shop faded away. Then he was moving toward their table. His steps measured his expression, a carefully controlled mask that didn't quite hide the storm of emotions beneath. "Rebecca," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Madison." Rebecca stood, her legs unsteady. "Hello, Michael." He looked at her as if memorizing every detail of her face, then shifted his attention to Madison, who remained seated watching him warily. "May I join you?" he asked formally, indicating the empty chair. "Please," Rebecca gestured. They sat an awkward triangle of silence forming as a waitress approached to take Michael's order. He requested black coffee without taking his eyes off Rebecca. When the waitress departed, Michael cleared his throat. "I don't even know where to begin." "I think explanations are in order," Rebecca said softly. "You deserve to know what happened 10 years ago." Michael nodded, his jaw tight. "Yes, I do." Rebecca glanced at Madison, who was watching the exchange with wide eyes. "It's not a pleasant story," she warned. "I can handle it," Madison insisted. "I want to know too." Rebecca took a deep breath. "It started a few weeks after our engagement was announced. Your mother, Evelyn, asked to meet with me privately. I thought perhaps she wanted to discuss wedding plans. I was so naive." Michael's expression darkened at the mention of his mother. "What did she do?" "She made it very clear that I wasn't the right choice for you, that I would drag you down, damage your future. When I told her I didn't care about status or money, that we loved each other, she laughed." Rebecca's voice faltered. Then she got serious. "She said if I didn't disappear from your life, there would be consequences." "What kind of consequences?" Michael asked, though his expression suggested he already knew the answer. "She said accidents happen all the time. Car brakes fail. People slip and fall." Rebecca's voice was barely audible now. "At first I thought she was just trying to scare me. Then a man approached me a few days later. Frank Donovan. He worked for your mother." "The man in the leather jacket," Madison interjected. "The one who was watching our building." Michael's head snapped toward Madison. "You saw him too yesterday." Madison nodded. "Mom says he's been watching us for years." Michael's face flushed with anger. "Even after my mother died." "Apparently," Rebecca confirmed. "Frank showed me photos of myself going about my daily routine, proof I was being watched. He explained in detail how they could make me disappear permanently if I didn't cooperate. Or worse, how they could hurt you, Michael. Make it look like an accident." "So you ran," Michael said flatly. "I didn't know what else to do. Evelyn had resources, connections. I had nothing, no one powerful enough to protect us." Rebecca paused. "And then I discovered I was pregnant." Michael's eyes dropped to Madison, who was picking at a napkin, pretending not to be affected by the conversation. "I didn't know," he said softly. "I would have protected you both." "How?" Rebecca challenged gently. "Your mother controlled everything, Michael. The family fortune, the company, your inheritance. And she was willing to go to extreme lengths to get what she wanted. By the time I found out about Madison, I was already living under a new identity in Chicago. Evelyn had arranged my death and made sure you believed it." Michael absorbed this, his face a mask of pain and fury. "All those years," he whispered. "I mourned you. I blamed myself for the accident. I thought if I hadn't asked you to meet me that night, you would still be alive." "There was no accident," Rebecca said. "Just a staged scene, a falsified death certificate, and a closed casket funeral where an empty coffin was buried." Madison, who had been silent, suddenly spoke up. "So my grandmother was a real villain, huh?" The blunt assessment broke the tension, causing both adults to look at her in surprise. Michael's expression softened. "My mother was complicated," he said carefully. "She grew up in a different time with different values. She thought she was protecting me, protecting the family legacy." He shook his head. "But what she did was unforgivable." "Why didn't you try to contact Michael later?" Madison asked her mother. "After we moved to Boston, after his mom died." Rebecca looked down at her coffee cup. "Fear becomes a habit. I was afraid of what would happen if I suddenly reappeared. Afraid of Michael's anger, of legal consequences for the deception. Afraid of disrupting your life, Madison." She looked up at Michael. "And I was afraid you might have moved on, found someone else, built a new life." "I never did," Michael said simply. "Not really." Their eyes met, decades of unspoken words passing between them. Madison watched them curiously, trying to reconcile these two adults with their history of love and loss with her own understanding of who they were. The waitress returned with Michael's coffee, breaking the moment. He thanked her automatically, then turned his attention to Madison. "I want you to know," he said carefully, "that if I had known about you, nothing would have kept me away. Not my mother, not threats, nothing." Madison studied him, her expression guarded. "You would have wanted me, even though I messed up your plans." Michael's face registered shock. "Messed up my plans, Madison? You wouldn't have messed up anything. You would have been my daughter, the most important person in my life." "But I'm not," Madison said plainly. Important in your life, I mean. You just found out about me 2 days ago. Rebecca started to intervene, but Michael held up a hand. No, she's right. I don't get to claim a decade of fatherhood I didn't experience. He leaned forward, speaking directly to Madison. But I would like the chance to be part of your life now if you'll let me, to get to know you, to be whatever kind of father you need. Madison considered this, her young face serious beyond her years. I already have a life, friends at school, routines with mom. I don't need fancy stuff or a big house. I'm not trying to buy your affection, Madison, Michael assured her. I just want to be in your life, on your terms. And what about mom, Madison pressed. Are you mad at her for not telling you about me? Michael glanced at Rebecca, their eyes meeting briefly before he returned his attention to Madison. I'm sad about the time we lost. All of us. But I understand why your mother did what she did. She was protecting you. Protecting herself. I can't be angry about that. Madison nodded slowly, processing his words. So what happens now? It was the question hanging over all of them. What came next? How did they move forward from here? I think, Michael said carefully, that we take things one step at a time. Get to know each other. Figure out what kind of relationship feels right for all of us. That sounds reasonable, Rebecca agreed, relief evident in her voice. There is one thing I'd like to suggest, Michael added. A DNA test. Rebecca tensed. You don't believe Madison is yours. I do, Michael said quickly. I can see myself in her eyes in the shape of her face. But for legal reasons to establish her rights, her inheritance, we should have official confirmation. Madison frowned. Inheritance, you mean money when you die? Michael smiled slightly. Among other things. But more importantly, legal recognition. The right to call yourself Madison Harris if you want to. The right to be acknowledged as my daughter in every way. Madison looked uncertain. I don't know if I want to change my name. You don't have to decide anything now, Michael assured her. The test is just a formality, a starting point. Rebecca nodded slowly. It's a reasonable request. We can arrange it next week. Thank you, Michael said. He hesitated, then added, there's something else we need to discuss. The man watching your apartment, Frank Donovan. If he's still surveilling you after all these years, we need to understand why and put a stop to it. You think he might be dangerous? Rebecca asked instinctively, moving closer to Madison. I don't know, Michael admitted, but I intend to find out. In the meantime, I'd like to arrange security for both of you. Rebecca shook her head. We don't need bodyguards, Michael. That would terrify Madison, disrupt our lives. It doesn't have to be intrusive, Michael insisted. Just someone keeping an eye out, making sure you're safe. Madison looked between them, sensing the first real tension in their conversation. Mom, maybe it's not a bad idea. That Frank guy kind of creeped me out. Rebecca hesitated, then conceded. All right, but nothing obvious. No men in suits following us around. Madison has enough to adjust to without feeling like she's under surveillance. Agreed, Michael said. He pulled out his phone. I can have someone in place by this afternoon, discreet but effective. As Michael made a quick call, Rebecca and Madison exchanged glances, a private communication passing between them. Their lives had changed irreversibly in the span of 48 hours. The future was uncertain, filled with possibilities both exciting and terrifying. When Michael finished his call, he looked up to find both of them watching him. It's arranged. You won't even notice them, but you'll be protected. Thank you, Rebecca said softly. There's one more thing I'd like to ask, Michael said, his expression growing serious. Would you both come to dinner at my house next weekend? Nothing formal, just a chance to spend more time together. My sister Stephanie would like to meet you too, Madison. She's your aunt. Madison's eyes widened. I have an aunt? Yes, Michael smiled. And she's very excited about having a niece. Madison looked to her mother. Can we go? Rebecca hesitated, memories of the Harris mansion bringing back waves of anxiety. But the hopeful look on Madison's face made the decision for her. Yes, we can go. Michael's smile lit up his face, years dropping away in an instant. Wonderful. I'll have Robert prepare something special. Robert is, Rebecca asked. My house manager. You'll like him. He's been with the family for decades. The conversation continued, tentative but warming, as the initial shock wore off. Michael asked Madison about school, her interests, her friends. Madison gradually relaxed, answering more freely, even asking him questions in return. Rebecca watched them, emotions warring within her, the most prominent being a cautious hope. As their coffee cups emptied, Michael glanced at his watch reluctantly. I have a meeting I can't miss, board business related to a potential acquisition of my company. Of course. Rebecca said, gathering her purse. We should be going too. They walked out of the coffee shop together, standing awkwardly on the sidewalk. Michael wanted to embrace Rebecca, to hold Madison, but knew it was too soon. Can I drive you home? He offered instead. Rebecca shook her head. We'll take the bus. It's our regular routine. Michael nodded, accepting the boundary. I'll call you this week about the DNA test and about dinner next weekend. We'll be waiting, Rebecca said. Madison, after a moment's hesitation, took a step toward Michael. Thank you for the coffee and for not being mad at Mom. Michael's throat tightened with emotion. Thank you for finding me, Madison, for bringing your mother back into my life. As they parted ways, Michael watched them walk toward the bus stop, Rebecca's arm around Madison's shoulders. His daughter, his family, found after a decade of emptiness. His phone buzzed with a text from Robert. Urgent, information about Frank Donovan. Call immediately. Michael's brief moment of happiness evaporated. Whatever Robert had discovered, it couldn't be good news. He hurried to his car, casting one last glance at Rebecca and Madison before they disappeared around a corner. The past was catching up to all of them, and Michael had a sinking feeling that their reunion was just the beginning of a much more complicated story. The cemetery stretched out in perfect rows of marble and granite silent sentinels, marking lives completed. Michael Harris stood motionless before his mother's grave, an imposing black marble monument bearing the name Evelyn Victoria Harris, along with the dates that bookended her life. Fresh flowers already adorned the site, probably placed by the cemetery staff paid to maintain the appearance of remembrance. You lied to me, Michael said quietly to the stone. You took everything from me. The morning after meeting Rebecca and Madison at the coffee shop, Michael had felt compelled to come here to confront the architect of his decade of grief. The revelation about Frank Donovan had only strengthened his resolve. According to Robert's investigation, Donovan hadn't just been Evelyn's enforcer. He'd remained on the Harris family payroll through a shell company for years after Evelyn's death. The surveillance of Rebecca and Madison had continued, presumably as insurance against their reappearance in Michael's life. Did you ever feel remorse? Michael asked the silent grave. Did you ever consider what you were doing to your own son, to your granddaughter? Only the October wind answered, rustling through the maple trees that dotted the cemetery grounds. Their leaves were turning brilliant reds and golds against the gray sky, nature's last defiant blaze before winter's arrival. Mr. Harris. Michael turned to find an elderly man in work clothes watching him from a respectful distance. The man held gardening tools and wore the weathered look of someone who spent his days tending the grounds of the dead. Yes, I'm sorry to disturb you, sir. I'm Walter Briggs, head groundskeeper. The man hesitated. I recognized you from the photos. Michael frowned. Photos? The ones she brought. Your mother, she came here often in her final years. Always sat right there. He pointed to a bench near the grave. Talking to herself, sometimes for hours, always with a photo album. Michael's interest sharpened. What kind of photos? Family pictures mostly. You as a boy, your sister, and a little girl I didn't recognize. Red hair about this tall. Walter held his hand about waist high. Your mother would look at that one the longest. Madison, it had to be. But how had Evelyn gotten photographs of her granddaughter? Did my mother ever mention who the little girl was? Michael asked carefully. Walter scratched his chin thoughtfully. Not directly, no, but once near the end she was particularly upset, talking about mistakes and regrets. Said something about the child should have known her heritage. Michael felt a chill that had nothing to do with the autumn air. Did she leave anything here? Items, letters, anything unusual? Well, now that you mention it, Walter gestured toward a large angel statue about 20 feet away. She used to hide things in the planter at the base of that angel, said it was her secret spot. I never looked, wasn't my business. But she'd put something in and take something out every visit. Michael thanked the groundskeeper with a generous tip and waited until the man had moved on to other duties before approaching the angel. Its marble face gazed serenely skyward, indifferent to human secrets. At its base, a decorative planter held artificial flowers. Michael moved them aside and felt around the interior. His fingers connected with something hard and square wrapped in plastic. He withdrew it carefully, a small metal box, weatherproofed with layers of plastic wrap. Michael unwrapped it with trembling fingers. Inside lay a collection of photographs just as Walter had described. Madison at various ages, walking to school, playing in a park, sitting on a bus with Rebecca. There were dozens of them, a chilling record of surveillance. But beneath the photos was something even more disturbing, a letter addressed to Michael in his mother's elegant handwriting. He opened it with a growing sense of dread. Michael, if you are reading this, I am gone and you have discovered the truth I worked so hard to conceal. Rebecca lives. Your child lives. I did what I believed necessary to protect our family's legacy from a woman who would have destroyed it. I make no apologies for my actions, only for their unexpected consequence, your prolonged unhappiness. That was never my intention. You were meant to move forward, to marry appropriately, to build the future our family deserves. The child is yours. The DNA confirmation is in this box. I had samples collected surreptitiously and tested. She is a Harris by blood, whatever her legal name may be. What you do with this information is your choice. The company that monitors them can be dissolved with a phone call to our family attorney. The account number is enclosed. Whatever you may think of me now, remember that I acted out of love for you and for our family name. Your mother, Evelyn Harris. Michael read the letter twice, his hands shaking with fury by the second reading. His mother had known about Madison all along, had secretly tracked her development while letting Michael believe the child's mother was dead, had even obtained DNA confirmation of Madison's paternity without his knowledge. And all for the family legacy, the precious Harris name that had to be protected at all costs. Beneath the letter lay a sealed envelope containing account numbers and contact information for the shell company paying Frank Donovan. Michael pocketed it along with the photographs and letter, then replaced the metal box in the planner. He needed time to process what he'd discovered before deciding his next move. As Michael walked back to his car, his phone rang. The screen displayed Stephanie, but he let it go to voicemail. His sister would have to wait. Right now, he needed to ensure Rebecca and Madison's safety, which meant confronting Frank Donovan. Across the city, Madison sat in her bedroom, attempting to focus on homework, while her mind kept wandering to thoughts of Michael, her father. The words still felt strange, a shape her mouth wasn't accustomed to forming. For 10 years, father had been an abstract concept, a void in her life marked by careful avoidance and gentle fabrications. Now it had a face, a voice, a name. Madison, Rebecca called from the doorway. How's the math coming along? Madison gestured at her mostly blank worksheet. Not great, I can't concentrate. Rebecca entered and sat on the edge of the bed. Thinking about yesterday. Madison nodded. It's weird. He seems nice, but he's still a stranger. But also, he's my dad. It's confusing. Rebecca smiled gently. I know, it's a lot to process. Were you in love with him back then? Madison asked suddenly. Rebecca's expression softened with memory. Very much so. We were going to build a life together. Do you still love him? The question caught Rebecca off guard. That was a long time ago, Madison. People change. I've changed. He's changed. But you didn't answer the question, Madison pointed out with the directness of youth. Rebecca sighed. The truth is, I don't know. I love the Michael I knew 10 years ago. This Michael is someone new to me. Madison considered this. He never got married. That's what he said right after you died. He never found someone else. That's what he said, yes. So maybe he still loves you too. Rebecca shook her head with a small smile. It's not that simple, honey. There's history between us now. Complications. Trust that needs rebuilding. Because of what his mom did, partly, and partly because of choices I made, keeping you from him even after his mother died. Rebecca touched Madison's cheek gently. But whatever happens between Michael and me, one thing is certain, he wants to be your father. That's what matters most right now. Madison leaned into her mother's touch. I'm scared, she admitted. What if I'm not what he expects? What if he changes his mind about wanting me in his life? That won't happen, Rebecca assured her. The way he looked at you yesterday, that wasn't the look of a man who will change his mind. That was a father seeing his child for the first time, memorizing every detail, trying to make up for lost time in a single glance. Before Madison could respond, a knock at the apartment door startled them both. Rebecca tensed, glancing at the clock. They weren't expecting anyone. Stay here, she told Madison, moving cautiously to the door. Through the peephole, she saw a face she hadn't seen in a decade but had never forgotten. Frank Donovan, older now but still imposing, stood in the hallway. Rebecca's heart raced as she contemplated her options. She could pretend no one was home, but he likely knew they were inside. She could call Michael, but help would take time to arrive. Or she could face the man who had delivered Evelyn Harris's ultimatum all those years ago. Taking a deep breath, Rebecca opened the door, keeping the security chain engaged. What do you want, Frank? She asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Donovan's weathered face registered surprise at her recognition. "We need to talk, Ms. Clark. It's important. We have nothing to discuss. It's about Michael Harris." Donovan's voice lowered. "And about Evelyn's contingency plans. You and your daughter could be in danger." Rebecca hesitated, then closed the door to remove the security chain before reopening it. "Madison, stay in your room," she called over her shoulder before stepping back to allow Donovan entry. He entered cautiously, his eyes scanning the modest apartment with professional assessment. "You've done well for yourselves considering." "Get to the point, Frank. What danger are you talking about?" Donovan sighed heavily, suddenly looking every one of his 60-plus years. Evelyn Harris didn't trust people, not even her own family. She set up fail-safe contingencies in case certain events occurred after her death. "What kind of contingencies?" Rebecca asked, dread building. "If Michael ever discovered you were alive, if he ever found out about Madison, certain protocols would be triggered." Donovan reached into his jacket, causing Rebecca to flinch, but he withdrew only a folded document. "This is from Evelyn's personal files. It outlines what would happen if her arrangement was compromised." Rebecca took the paper with trembling hands and read it, her face paling. "This can't be legal." "It's not," Donovan agreed, "but legality never stopped Evelyn Harris. She believed the family fortune belonged under her control, even from beyond the grave. If Michael acknowledges Madison as his daughter, the terms of his inheritance change dramatically. He loses control of the company," Rebecca summarized, still reading. "His voting shares get distributed to the board of directors." "Yes, and there's more. Evelyn left instructions with the family lawyer, Richard Morgan, to contest any attempt to legally establish Madison as Michael's heir. She set aside funds specifically to fight this in court for years." Rebecca looked up from the document. "Why are you telling me this? You worked for Evelyn. You helped her separate us from Michael." Donovan's expression hardened. "I did my job, followed orders, kept an eye on you and the girl, made sure you stayed away from Michael." He paused. "But I never signed up to destroy a man's life from beyond the grave, even Evelyn's. So what do you want from me?" "Nothing. I'm done with this, all of it. I've watched you struggle for years, seen you raise that girl alone. Seen Michael live half a life, thinking he'd lost everything." Donovan moved toward the door. "I'm warning you because you deserve to know what you're walking into. And because Madison deserves better than to be a pawn in Evelyn's posthumous games." After Donovan left, Rebecca stood frozen, the document clutched in her hand. The implications were staggering. If Michael publicly acknowledged Madison as his daughter, he could lose control of his company. Everything he had built could be taken from him by his mother's machinations, even years after her death. Mum. Madison stood in her bedroom doorway. "Who was that man?" Rebecca quickly folded the paper and tucked it away. "Just someone with a message. Nothing for you to worry about." But the concern in her eyes told a different story, one that Madison was becoming increasingly adept at reading. Michael Harris sat in his parked car outside Frank Donovan's modest house in Dorchester. He'd obtained the address from Robert's investigation and had been waiting for over an hour, rehearsing what he would say when confronted with the man who had helped orchestrate the deception that stole a decade of his life. When a sedan pulled into the driveway, Michael recognized the driver as the same man who had been watching Madison the day before. He waited until Donovan had unlocked his front door before approaching, his footsteps deliberately heavy on the walkway to announce his presence. Donovan turned unsurprised. "I wondered when you'd show up," he said, leaving the door open in silent invitation. Michael followed him inside, taking in the Spartan furnishings of a man who lived alone and didn't much care about comforts. There were no photographs, no personal touches beyond a few books and an old television set. "You know why I'm here," Michael said, remaining standing, as Donovan settled into an armchair. "Rebecca and Madison," Donovan confirmed with a nod. "I just came from their apartment." Michael's anger flared. "You stay away from them." "Relax, Harris. I didn't go there to threaten them. I went to warn them. Same warning I'm about to give you." Donovan gestured to an envelope on the coffee table. "Your mother left a mess for you to clean up." Michael glanced at the envelope but didn't touch it. "I know. I found her letter at the cemetery. I know about the surveillance, the shell company, the DNA test she had done without my knowledge." Donovan raised an eyebrow. "She always said you were smart. But do you know about the inheritance clauses, the provisions she made with Richard Morgan to contest Madison's legitimacy? The redistribution of your controlling interest in Harris Technologies if you acknowledge your daughter." This was new information, and Michael couldn't fully hide his shock. "Explain." "Your mother anticipated the possibility, however remote, that Rebecca might someday resurface with your child. She put contingencies in place. If you legally recognize Madison as your daughter, your voting shares in the company get redistributed to the board. You lose control of Harris Technologies. Donovan nodded toward the envelope. It's all in there. Copies of the legal documents, the secret codicils to her, will everything. Michael finally picked up the envelope, his mind racing. Why are you telling me this? Why turn against her now? Donovan was silent for a long moment. I've done a lot of things in my life I'm not proud of. Followed orders without questioning them. But watching that little girl grow up without her father, watching you build a company while living like a ghost. He shook his head. Even I have limits. Evelyn's gone. Her vendetta should die with her. Yet you continued the surveillance after her death, Michael pointed out coldly. I was paid to do a job. The payments kept coming automatically through the shell company, so I kept doing it. Donovan shrugged. Until yesterday when I saw you with them at the coffee shop, saw the three of you together. That's when I decided enough. Michael studied the man before him, trying to reconcile the cold enforcer of his mother's will with this apparently repentant figure. What do you want from me? Nothing, I'm done. Consider this my resignation. Donovan nodded again at the envelope. That's everything I have on Evelyn's plans. What you do with it is your business. Michael tucked the envelope into his jacket. If I find out you've gone near Rebecca or Madison again for any reason, you won't, Donovan interrupted. I'm leaving Boston. There's nothing for me here anymore. As Michael drove back to Beacon Hill, his mind churned with the implications of what he'd learned. His mother's reach extended beyond the grave, threatening not only his relationship with his newly discovered daughter, but also his control of the company he'd built. If the board got wind of this, especially Richard Morgan, they could use it to force his hand on the pending acquisition. He needed legal counsel, someone not connected to the family's usual attorneys. And he needed to warn Rebecca about what they were facing. Back at his mansion, Michael found Stephanie waiting in his study, her expression a mixture of concern and irritation. Where have you been? She demanded. I've been calling all day. The board is in an uproar about the acquisition delay. I had more important matters to deal with, Michael replied, tossing the envelope onto his desk. Stephanie eyed it suspiciously. What's that? Mother's final attempt to control my life. He briefly explained what he had discovered, watching his sister's face cycle through shock, disbelief, and finally anger. She can't do this, Stephanie said when he finished. It's not right. Apparently she can. The question is, what do we do about it? Stephanie paced the room, her legal training evident in her methodical analysis. We need to challenge the codicil to her will. We need to prove she acted with malice, that these provisions are vindictive rather than protective of family interests. That could take years, Michael pointed out. Years during which Madison remains legally unrecognized and I potentially lose control of the company. Then we need leverage, something to use against Richard Morgan and the board. Something to make them back off from enforcing these provisions. Stephanie stopped pacing. What about Rebecca? Could she help? Michael shook his head. I won't involve her in this ugliness. She and Madison have been through enough. But Michael, if Rebecca testified about what Mother did, the threats, the false death certificate, the surveillance, it could invalidate the codicil. No court would uphold provisions based on such actions. Michael considered this reluctantly. I'll discuss it with her, but I won't pressure her. This has to be her choice. His phone rang and Rebecca's name appeared on the screen. Michael answered immediately. Rebecca, is everything all right? Frank Donovan came to see me, she said without preamble. He told me about Evelyn's plans, about what happens if you acknowledge Madison as your daughter. I know, I just found out myself. Michael ran a hand through his hair. I'm so sorry, Rebecca. Even from the grave, she's trying to keep us apart. We need to talk in person. Of course. Where? Can you come to our apartment? Madison's at a friend's house for a study session. We'll have privacy. Michael agreed, noting the address, and ended the call. He turned to Stephanie. I have to go. Rebecca wants to discuss this situation. Stephanie nodded. Go. I'll start researching ways to challenge Mother's provisions. There has to be a way around this. The South End apartment building looked even more weathered in the fading afternoon light. Michael took the stairs to the 4th floor, noting the peeling paint in worn carpeting. This was where his daughter had grown up, so different from the privileged environment he had known. Rebecca answered his knock immediately, as if she'd been waiting by the door. She looked tired, the stress of recent revelations evident in the shadows beneath her eyes. Thank you for coming, she said, stepping aside to let him enter. Michael took in the apartment with a quick glance. Small but well-maintained, filled with modest furniture and personal touches that spoke of a real home. Photos of Madison at various ages lined the walls. Books filled several shelves. A vase of wildflowers brightened the kitchen table. "It's not much," Rebecca said, noting his assessment, "but it's home." "It's lovely," Michael replied sincerely. "Warm, lived in. The mansion never feels this way." Rebecca gestured for him to sit on the small sofa while she took the armchair opposite. "Donovan showed me the documents. If you legally acknowledge Madison as your daughter, you lose control of your company." Michael nodded grimly. "My mother's final act of control. What are you going to do?" The question hung in the air between them, weighted with a decade of separation and newfound complications. "The right thing," Michael said finally. "Madison is my daughter. I won't deny her to protect my business interests." Relief flickered across Rebecca's face, followed quickly by concern. "But your company, everything you've built, is just a company," Michael interrupted. "I can build another if necessary. But Madison is my child, our child. I've lost 10 years with her. I won't lose any more because of my mother's manipulations." Rebecca's eyes filled with unexpected tears. "I was afraid," she admitted softly. "Afraid you might choose the company over her. It would be understandable. You barely know her." Michael leaned forward, his gaze intense. "I knew her the moment I saw her in my hallway pointing at your photograph. I knew her as surely as I've ever known anything." He paused. "She's part of you, part of me. Nothing matters more than that." Rebecca wiped away a tear. "Thank you," she whispered. "Don't thank me for being her father. That's not a choice, it's who I am." Michael smiled sadly. "The choice was taken from both of us 10 years ago. I'm just reclaiming it now." Rebecca nodded, understanding. "So what happens next? Will the board really take your company?" "They'll try. Richard Morgan especially will push for it. He's been angling for more control for years." Michael's expression hardened. "But I'm not going down without a fight. I have resources, connections, and I have the truth on my side. The truth about what my mother did, the false death certificate, the threats, the illegal surveillance. None of that will stand up in court." Michael reached for her hand, cautiously giving her time to pull away. When she didn't, he took it gently in his. "Rebecca, would you be willing to testify about what happened, about the threats, about how you were forced to disappear?" Rebecca's hand trembled in his. "You're asking me to publicly admit to faking my death, to expose Madison to public scrutiny and gossip, to fight your mother's posthumous battle in the open." "I know it's a lot to ask," Michael acknowledged. "And if you say no, I'll understand. I'll find another way." Rebecca withdrew her hand slowly. "I need time to think about it, to consider what's best for Madison." "Of course." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of decisions yet to be made hanging between them. Finally, Rebecca spoke again. "Do you remember the day we met?" Michael smiled at the unexpected question. "At the Woodstock '94 revival. You were wearing a flowered sundress. Your friend had dragged you there against your will. And you spilled your drink on me within 5 minutes of saying hello." Rebecca finished, a small smile playing at her lips. "In my defense, someone bumped into me. You were so apologetic. Offered me your t-shirt to replace my soaked dress, which you sensibly declined," Michael recalled, "though you did accept my offer of dinner the following night." They both laughed softly at the memory, the tension in the room easing slightly. "We were so young," Rebecca mused, "so full of plans." "We still could be," Michael said quietly. "Full of plans, I mean." Rebecca's smile faded. "Michael, we can't just pick up where we left off. Too much has happened. We're different people now." "I know that," he assured her. "I'm not suggesting we return to the past. I'm saying we could build something new. For Madison's sake, at least." Rebecca studied him thoughtfully. "Is that all it would be, for Madison's sake?" Michael held her gaze steadily. "You know it wouldn't be. I never stopped loving you, Rebecca. Even when I thought you were gone, I couldn't let you go. Couldn't move on. Couldn't build a life with someone else." "That's not healthy, Michael." "Maybe not, but it's the truth." He leaned back, giving her space. "I'm not asking for declarations or commitments. I'm just saying there's potential here for all of us, if we're brave enough to explore it." Before Rebecca could respond, the sound of a key in the lock interrupted them. Madison entered, dropping her backpack by the door before noticing Michael. "Oh?" she said, surprised. "Hi." "Hello, Madison." Michael greeted her warmly. "How was your study session?" "Good. We're working on a science project about ecosystems." Madison glanced between the adults, sensing the emotional atmosphere. Is everything okay? Rebecca nodded, composing herself. Everything's fine, honey. Michael and I were just discussing some grown-up matters. Madison frowned skeptically. About me? Partly, Michael admitted, about our family situation. Madison's expression remained guarded, but something in Michael's phrase, our family, seemed to register with her. Are we still coming to dinner at your house this weekend? Absolutely, if you still want to. Madison nodded. I told my friend Zoe that my dad lives in a mansion. She didn't believe me. Dad. The word hung in the air, momentous in its simplicity. It was the first time Madison had referred to Michael as her father, and its impact was visible on his face, a flash of emotion so raw and powerful that he had to look down to compose himself. Well, we'll have to take some pictures to show her, Michael managed when he could trust his voice again. Madison smiled tentatively, then turned to her mother. Can I go change? These clothes smell like Jake's house, and his mom has like 20 cats. Rebecca nodded, and Madison disappeared into her bedroom, leaving the adults in thoughtful silence. She called me Dad, Michael said quietly. I noticed, Rebecca replied with a gentle smile. It's a start. Michael stood, recognizing it was time to leave. I should go, let you both have your evening routine. He hesitated. About the legal issues we discussed, take all the time you need to think it through. Whatever you decide, I'll support. Rebecca walked him to the door. I'll call you tomorrow, after I've had time to process everything. As Michael reached for the doorknob, Rebecca suddenly placed her hand on his arm. Michael, whatever happens with the legal battles in the company, promise me one thing. Anything. Don't disappear from her life again. Now that she's starting to let you in to think of you as her father, she couldn't bear to lose you a second time. Michael turned to face her fully. Rebecca, I swear to you, nothing will keep me from being Madison's father. Not my mother's schemes from beyond the grave, not the company, nothing. I will be there for her always. The conviction in his voice seemed to reassure her. She nodded, stepping back to allow him to leave. As Michael walked down the stairs of the apartment building, his phone buzzed with a text from Stephanie. Emergency board meeting called for tomorrow morning. Richard Morgan pushing for vote on acquisition. Need to talk ASAP. The battle lines were being drawn. The board was making its move, likely sensing his distraction and vulnerability. Michael squared his shoulders as he stepped out into the evening air. He had fought to build Harris Technologies from nothing. He had survived the loss of the woman he loved. He had endured a decade of emptiness. He would not be defeated now, not when he had finally found what truly mattered. Across town, in the elegant office of Richard Morgan, a different sort of meeting was taking place. Morgan sat behind his massive desk, his silver hair perfectly coiffed, his expression calculating as he listened to the man seated across from him. So Harris knows everything, Morgan summarized. About the girl, about Evelyn's provisions, all of it. Frank Donovan nodded. Yes, both Harris and Rebecca Clark are fully informed. Morgan tapped his fingers thoughtfully on the polished surface of his desk. And you're certain he intends to claim the girl publicly, despite the consequences to his control of the company? He seemed determined, Donovan confirmed. Family over business, he said. Morgan's thin lips curved in a satisfied smile. Excellent. Evelyn predicted as much. Sentiment was always his weakness. He opened a drawer and withdrew an envelope, sliding it across to Donovan. Your final payment as agreed. Your services are no longer required. Donovan took the envelope without counting its contents. What happens to the girl and her mother? That's no longer your concern. Donovan's weathered face hardened. I've done a lot of questionable things for the Harris family, Morgan, but I draw the line at harming a child or her mother. Morgan waved a dismissive hand. No one's talking about harm, merely leverage, to ensure Michael makes the right decisions regarding the company's future. Donovan stood, tucking the envelope into his jacket. I've given you the information you requested. My obligation ends there. Of course, Morgan smiled thinly. You're free to go. Leave Boston as you planned. Enjoy your retirement. After Donovan departed, Morgan picked up his phone and dialed a number from memory. It's confirmed, he said when the call connected. Harris knows everything and still intends to claim the girl. Proceed with phase 2. The sun had fully set by the time Michael returned to his mansion. Robert greeted him with the news that Stephanie was waiting in his study, pacing anxiously among the leather-bound books and antique furnishings. The board is making its move, she said without preamble as Michael entered. Richard Morgan has called an emergency meeting for tomorrow morning. The official agenda is the Axiom Tech acquisition, but I suspect he knows about Madison. How could he know? Michael asked, though even as the question left his mouth, he suspected the answer. Frank Donovan, Stephanie suggested, confirming his thought. He's played both sides before. Michael nodded grimly. We need to prepare for the worst. If Morgan has evidence of Madison's existence, he could invoke Mother's provisions immediately before we have time to challenge them legally. What's our strategy? Michael moved to the window, looking out at the city lights glimmering in the distance. Somewhere out there, his daughter was preparing for bed, perhaps thinking about him, about the changes coming into her life. He wouldn't let her down. He wouldn't let his mother's toxic legacy taint her future. We fight, he said, simply turning back to his sister. On all fronts. Legally, we challenge Mother's codicil. Publicly, we embrace Madison as a Harris. And with the board, we make it clear that any attempt to enforce these vindictive provisions will be met with the full force of our resources and influence. Stephanie nodded, a slow smile.